This is a Power 98.7 podcast. Now we're talking. Subscribe to Power 98.7 podcasts in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. There's more on power987.co.za.
However, in contrast, we're going to be talking about, and I mean, I sigh because it's one of those things that we want to talk about in contrast to popular perspective. As a society, we are very often quick to call out absent fathers, but very rarely do we acknowledge the fathers that want to be present in situations where they are not allowed to be. As someone who was privileged enough to have a very present father, these conversations always tug at my heartstrings. I cannot imagine a child being deprived of a loving and willing father. We are in conversation with Ronald Muringai, who is the author of Fathering a Son. And we're going to be talking about whether our country's divorce laws fail good fathers who do actually want to raise their children. And we're saying this on the backdrop of, as a society, we do the right thing by calling out absent fathers. But do we acknowledge that we have policies in place that do prevent, or that are built or structurally built to prevent, fathers who actually do want to be in the lives of their children, who want to be present, who want to be superheroes and Superman to their children. And again, it becomes a conversation we all need to have, because we're not saying every father that's not there wants to be there. And we're not saying every father that's allowed to be there wants to be there. It's always a complex situation, but let's acknowledge where the barriers are and maybe discuss those and dismantle them where we can. Ronald, good morning.
Good morning, Musa, and good morning to your listeners as well. Privilege and an honor to be on your show today.
No, thank you so much. It's early in the morning, and we appreciate and are very grateful for you spending some time with us, especially to talk about something I want to say so heavy yet so necessary.
Very, very, very heavy and very necessary. And I think it's really, like I said, a privilege to be invited to speak today. I think I'll be wearing two hats today. As you mentioned earlier, I did write a book called Fathering Sons, which has kind of turned me into an activist for fathers' rights. Mm-hmm. But also, interestingly, I'm also in my third year of studying law now. So this topic that you're having today kind of intersects into both what I've been doing professionally and what I'm studying academically. I couldn't wait to just be on this show tonight. So yes, thank you very much again.
No, thank you, Ronald, for being with us. Maybe let's talk about this as an opening to this conversation. Why is it, and is there a reason why statistically more women file for divorce and divorce laws are always on their side?
Right. So I think the earlier question, I probably would have to put that to a psychologist. Mm-hmm. I haven't really researched much on why women go first to file for divorce. But the second one, I think, is influenced really by our traditional and archetypal perceptions that kind of say, at least in the developmental stages of a child's growth, I think that's between the year of 1 and 5, it's culturally perceived to be better for the child to be growing up with their mother than with their father, it's like I said, it's a traditional cultural concept, not necessarily a legal concept. But we must admit and accept the fact that it does, at the end of the day, affect decisions that are made within the legal principalities, which is the courts, for example. So it is a fact indeed that I think up to 80% of children post-divorce do end up with their mothers and not necessarily their fathers. Even though that's been turning in the last few years, it's still pretty much heavily staked against the fathers. That is a statement of fact.
And let's maybe piggyback off of that and figure out what measures are in place. And I mean, I'm saying this because, as you said, traditionally, it's historically made sense for kids of very early age to spend time with their mothers. However, we know that statistically a lot of divorces do happen in the first 5 to 10 years of a marriage, meaning at that point the children are obviously in the age that we're talking about. So, if with considering all of that, what policies or what measures are in place to protect the dads that do want to be there, because we do know that there's a flaw in our law that allows women to have custody by virtue of traditional history.
Yes.
And by value of believability, they will have custody of the children.
That's true.
What measures are in place to protect fathers who want to be there?
Right. So I think the law, especially the latest children's law, has been very progressive in trying to address that anomaly. And traditionally, even within the legal system, it has been skewed towards the mothers or the women, as it were, especially in a case of divorce, or even in case of fathers who are not necessarily married to the mothers of their children, but want to take part. So the law, even if you look at the registration at Home Affairs, was really just looking at, okay, who's the mother of the child? If father is not available, hey, we just move on and put the mother, and the child automatically adopts the mother's surname. So all of this, I think the Children's Act of 2005 kind of tries to address most of these things and remove that bias, as it were, in as much as it's going to take a long time. Because remember, the law is not really a static object. It's not just because it's written, it shall be as thus, because interpretation in the courts becomes something else as well, given the context in which we live in and the cultural perceptions that we have as well. So the new law, basically being 2005 when it was enacted, kind of gives protection to fathers who are not necessarily married to the mothers of the children, and those who go through a separation or divorce to a greater level than was there before. And I think there are more cases now that we're seeing where fathers are actually getting primary custody ahead of the mother of the child. It's still a long way to go, yes, but I think we must acknowledge that on a policy perspective, at least on paper, the intentions are good. What Parliament has given and what the courts are implementing now is really I would say, acceptable law. It's not perfect, yes, but it does give protection to the rights of the fathers who do not have access to their children, or are denied access to their children, or some children are used against them, in the play between the divorce attorneys, as it were. So on a legal perspective, on a policy perspective, to really just answer the question directly, there is a good law to protect fathers rights to access their children, whether or not they are married, and in the case of separation and divorce. And I think it's just a matter of now that filtering more into our court system and more into societal acceptance that, it is actually possible for a father to take primary care of their child and have the mother have visitation rights. Still uncharted territory, like I say, but there are more cases that are coming out of the courts and granting more and more fathers access to their children beyond just visitation.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think that the law is very, very extensive on that. But yeah, I think let's see what happens in the next generation. Of course, it's an issue that we must talk about now. And I think even the song that you played earlier kind of puts in perspective when you think of the children that have grown up with their fathers, and when we deny the same rights, based on this old or archaic cultural or legal principle, it then says we are setting up our children for the next generation almost for failure, because we're not giving them the fair access to their parents as we've had ourselves. Well, those who have been privileged anyway, statistically, to have their fathers at home.
So I think the last time I really did pay attention to parenting laws between separated parents, it was a big hoo-ha that was coming from the Department of Home Affairs as far as traveling regulations were concerned, where as a separated parent you had to get the approval of another parent by virtue of either an affidavit or some letter from the police, and this obviously was in favor of the mothers who already lived with the children, and therefore the child could not travel, get out of the country, or visit their family anywhere else unless the father had to be. There was a law around that I know with my limited knowledge would be able to articulate. How far have we gone with that? Have we remedied that? Is that still the situation?
Right. So regarding the transportation of children, I think the Department of Home Affairs really put in stringent measures, which have somewhat repealed a bit of that, especially with particular to the production of an unabridged birth certificate for when children are flying out to their children or leaving the country with their parents. But it's still pretty much the same. I think what as a result of this law, like I said, the law has been trying, or at least the government has been trying to almost equalize the rights, between the parents and make sure that, I think what it says is that from a policy perspective, it tries to look at the best interests of the child. And when having looked at all these psychological reports and all these things that really just put it together, make a child a whole individual by the time they grow up, we do realize obviously that you need a child needs his father and a child needs his mother. So at the end of the day, what the government has done in this particular regard with what you're mentioning now is to say, how do we make equal these things to make sure that this child not necessarily does not fall a victim of the agendas of either of the parents, but actually gets the best from them both, despite the breakdown of their relationship or the breakdown of their marriage. And thus, therefore, let's try and enforce that the big decisions that need to be taken within the family perspective regarding the movement of children is done with the consent of both parents. So, of course, like I said earlier, the law is not perfect, and it cannot over-legislate as well what can be done within the household setting. But it at least tries to provide that guidance and that protection for children, especially when they're going to be traveling outside. I think we can talk about the child trafficking issues, which really this law tried to kill as well. But speaking in this context that we're having today, it also just empowers both parents to say, if you're going to travel with your child and go to the UK, for example, and you want to work there for 5 years or whatever, at least let the father have a say in that, because that means, for a visitation perspective, he needs to fork out more money. Does he agree with that? Is he okay with his children growing up in Europe or, Africa elsewhere or North America, whatever the case may be? But it also, I think that the bottom and the thrust of that is, can we ensure that both parents have an equal say in ensuring that this child, when they're traveling, has equal access going forward, and it's not inhibited from seeing either parent because of that move.
I mean, I like the fact that you bring up the issue that the law does to some extent take care of both parents. However, we do realize that there usually is a bias as far as as divorcees are concerned. And I mean, what got to me as I was reading up about the equal treatment of parents was this article by Errol Guich. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. But he wrote this for City Press. It's called South Africa's Divorce Laws Fail Good Dads. And it describes this phenomena called the windmill. And the windmill is basically, it's a sequence of pre-planned dirty tricks using violence, tactical accusations, and sham litigation to win custody and money and get revenge in the divorce by raising a parent and stealing a child and giving a lawyer and accomplices super profits. How often are we seeing this in the law? How often are we seeing this in regular practice?
Right. So that, when I read that article as well, my heart really sank, because it takes away what the law is actually trying to do. I'm sure you've heard of the term, the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And this kind of really puts that to the fore, because what the law is trying to do is, obviously, like I said, it cannot not legislate every little thing to the detail. The child must be fed by this parent, the child must be taken by this parent to school, etc., etc. But it tries to set a framework through which both parents, post-divorce, post-separation, whatever it is, can have a workable arrangement to ensure that the child has access to both. And I think...
Ronald?
And there's always some sort of manipulation of the law, if I can put it like that takes place, where even lawyers themselves end up advising parents of children to almost exploit the loopholes of the law. And by loopholes, I don't mean, there's something that they really need to play in, but if you read that article, you'll see the tricks that the writer mentions, that, these people are not really standing on the truth anymore, but we're using what the law prescribes. If there's 1, 2, 3 case of abuse, whatever it is, physical, sexual, or alleged even, let's cut out the father. And that's tested or untested as an allegation, it already puts a strain now on the father from seeing or accessing their child. And I think that becomes an immoral question that the law cannot necessarily govern, you see. So the law, in terms of the framework and the policy, I would say is set to provide a good framework, but unfortunately, there's a number of people and parents and mothers and fathers and lawyers who come with a dirty mindset and try to short-circuit the system to get whatever end that they require. And I think that's where the problem starts now, where there's almost a corruption of the justice system to get what we want. So because I'm angry at this man, he's cheated on me, now he's gone to marry another wife, etc., etc., I am going to make sure that I will use this child against him to get his money, to shake him down, financially or whatever it is, and make sure that he pays for the sins that he's committed against me, and I'll use the child to get that. And I think that's where the wrong things start. We've seen a lot of cases of, I don't know if it's an appropriate term, but baby mamas who use the children against their fathers, because they want to try to get back at them for the wrongs that they performed or did not perform in the relationship that they had with those men. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where almost a separation takes place, where the law now is no longer just a law, but it's a moral question that we should ask ourselves to say, is that right? Should we be accepting things like this? Should we be accepting these antecedent allegations to influence decisions by the courts? Should we be accepting all these things that are put to set up fathers and to separate them from their children? Should they stand, before they even go through the testing phase within the court of law setting, for example? So sadly, the law cannot cover that. And hence you find a lot, I think there's a lot of those cases. I'm sure you've heard even on the street that you grew up in, of a mother who did something similar to that. And unfortunately, I think we need to come to a place where we mature as people, as mothers, as fathers, as parents to these children, to make sure that we think for the best interest of the child and not necessarily what it is that we want and what we want the other person to feel for whatever it is that they've done to us.
Because this then becomes your child being waged in the middle of a war between you and your partner, where the child did nothing wrong, but they then suffer the loss of a parent.
Yeah.
But then, the author in this article then proceeds to talk about Rule 43, which, by lack of my own legal knowledge, I don't think I can speak much to. But what is Rule 43, and is there a way to protect fathers from this?
Right. So, like I said, I'm only just in my third year. I haven't graduated and gotten onto the bar yet myself. But the thing that I get from the article that you're talking about in the rule is almost like it gives an instant injunction on the father from seeing the child based purely on the allegation made, whether it is that the father is potentially physically harming the child or even to the extent of sexually abusing the child. So the court has to now, like I said, act in the best interest of the child. And whether or not this is an allegation that's been tested or not is something that then becomes something that will be seen later. But in the meantime, let us stop this child from seeing this dad so that we test to the ends as possible these allegations. So that's, I think, what the writer is talking about, to say it automatically brings that injunction on the father, that he can no longer see his children for whatever period it is. And I think he estimates about 3 to 4 months already that, without a paper being signed or a document being sent, already the father can no longer access the child, which already is wrong in itself. So that also, like I said, is put in place, that rule, to protect the child in the case where indeed there is abuse happening. But now what is happening is, like the author of the article says, parents are taking advantage of that in conjunction with their unscrupulous lawyers to make sure that they get the judgments that they need from the judge. Because you see, when the judge is sitting there and looking at the paper evidence, he also needs to make a moral and a conscious decision based obviously on all these things, but also in the context of the case. And sometimes in the lack of evidence that refutes these allegations, he has to look at the child and think, okay, if really this is happening, what then can happen to make sure that the child doesn't go through the same thing? And he puts that injunction to make sure that child does not see dad for such a period, as a social worker must, check through the thing, or etc., whatever the case may be, to make sure that really these allegations are true or false as they are. So unfortunately, like I said, the moral question is we've found ourselves wanting, as parents, as mothers, where we trigger these things out of anger, out of deceit, to try and prevent children from seeing their fathers. And we don't know the damage that we're causing to these children going into the next generation for us to achieve our own selfish ends. And I think that's something that really we have to work towards and campaign against, and obviously conscientize society not to take that route, of separating father from child.
I understand that Rule 43 generally works with allegations, for the most part, with no evidence or without any investigation.
Yes.
How corrupt then is the system? Because I want to understand that once this case gets to a point where law officials are involved, and a child who is potentially being abused is involved, there must be social justice involved. The Department of Welfare must be involved. But if we really are being honest about the fact that there is no evidence towards this case, then how corrupt is the system? Because someone has to be telling a lie.
That's true. And I'll just refer to the current case. It won't have any bearing, I suppose, but to kind of give context to what we're talking about, to this famous musician who's been accused of rape by another famous musician, where obviously people have now taken sides and said, but there's no evidence, but, should we believe the victim? And if you look at the whole debate around that, it kind of says, which the law is now doing, and especially within this particular context, let's listen to the victim, In as much as we have not yet established whether or not it is true that abuse has taken place, but let's look at the victim and protect their interests first, and then we launch an investigation. So already in there's a bit of a lag. Whether or not it's true shall be established when the investigation is done. Maybe that's in a month, maybe that's in 2 months, maybe that's in 3 months, who knows? But in the meantime, as the investigation continues during that time, it basically almost puts on disadvantage the accused. They already carry a tag and a label which fairly or unfairly, will only be determined in the next 3 to 4 months. But in the meantime, what the law says is let's protect the potential or the perceived victim from the allegation that's put at hand. And that law, sadly, has been used as well now to take advantage, like I said, of these anger issues that we have against our spouses and our exes and our baby fathers, whatever it is, to say, I'm going to get back at you legally. And sadly, that's one of the things that lawyers are assisting, these angry mothers, if I can say that, to exploit that legal aspect that you're talking about right now. So the justice system in itself now almost looks like a stinker, like there's a rot setting in, and yet it's actually the people who are supposed to be custodians of this justice system within the legal fraternity to maintain and to protect the integrity of the law, but are actually now messing up and doing all these dirty tricks, to try and ensure that they get quick judgments to get the child that primary custody for their clients, and obviously the profit aspect that you mentioned about earlier. So it is sad, and sadly it is true. It is happening. I cannot really just estimate in terms of the numbers. I think the article you referred to speaks about 80% of those cases going in the manner that the mothers want, and primarily mothers. Yes, I think we should mention that as well. But I don't know now if we look at South Africa as a whole, how big is the phenomenon? I really cannot tell you right now. But we know that really it is happening, and it is true that the justice system has been abused by people such as this for their own selfish ends, unfortunately.
I mean, it saddens me. It saddens me, mostly because of the fact that we talk very freely of, very free and openly of absent fathers, and for the most part, I want to believe that these are absent fathers who are voluntarily not coming to the party as far as raising their children, is concerned. But we seemingly have, a concerningly number of fathers who do want to be there. And by virtue of the law, not even their intention, but by virtue of the law, they actually cannot be present. And I mean, we've spoken about the law side of stuff, but I'd want to maybe hear from you what got you to write, Fathering a Son or Fathering of Sons, and what is it about?
Right. So I think before I jump onto that, there's a guy I met at a seminar, I think about 2 weeks ago in Soweto, who had a similar problem. He could not access his kids from his previous marriage because his ex-wife was embittered, and the whole thing kind of got messy in the court and whatever. And he was also saying the same that you say now, that he really wanted to raise his kids. He really wanted to have time with his kids. But now the woman who he was married to and the mother of his children was putting any and every legal block to make sure that he doesn't access his kids. So there is shame, unfortunately, a lot of men out there who are suffering from this thing. And I think we need to get to a place, I don't know how we can make it right, men, to conscientize these mothers that, you know what, you might be angry, you might really be full of hurt and anger at this man that has treated you right or done, whatever it is that to you, but that does not give you any right whatsoever to block access to the kids, unless, of course, the father is a danger to the children, which the law, of course, protects. But I think, in all honesty and in all fairness, we should have access to the kids, to their fathers, despite the breakdown of our relationships. Love has its issues, its ups and downs. But when it does finally break down, listen, we should not keep kids away from their fathers. Now, that links then to the book that I wrote. The book that I wrote is called Fathering Sons, and it kind of stemmed from the conversations, that I had with my father just before he passed away. I grew up, they divorced my mom, I think I was 6 years old, and thank God, I think my mom really wasn't a bitter woman. She would always encourage us to go see our dad. She would always encourage us to speak positively of our dad, even though I was angry, and at some point in time I even wanted to change my surname, to my mom's surname, because I was angry with my dad for not being there, etc., etc. So with all that anger that I grew up with, I only got to have a proper conversation with him and a moment of forgiveness when I was already 28 years old. And by God's grace, it was literally the last conversation I had with him, because a week later I was in an accident, and a week after that he passed away. So I kind of had gotten myself to a place of forgiving him for the things that he did or did not do. And I think from there, it's conversations I've been having over a number of years now with a lot of men who I think suffer from this fatherlessness thing. You did mention it earlier that we kind of call out fathers who do not stand up for their children. Stats currently put that at about 6 out of 10 children in South Africa growing up without their fathers at home. So it is still an epidemic to this day. And for me, writing this book, it's been to say now, okay, we've heard the stats, we've seen the numbers. What can we practically do to make sure that even the boy next door who doesn't even know his father is given the required and the requisite mentorship to make him a wholesome individual in society? And so the book then talks about the things that a boy child requires from his father or / mentor or malume or whoever the man that is, over an authority over his life, to make sure that by the time he becomes a man, he's a better product of society than our generation was. And hopefully, my hope, obviously, from the book is that this 6 out of 10 statistic I mentioned earlier becomes 3 out of 10, becomes 2 out of 10, and hopefully dies off.
Dies out.
Yes.
Which is an amazing objective or an amazing goal, considering we've seen what research has said about the product of the product of society as far as boy children is concerned, in the absence of male figures. And there is for me still a need for us to observe this closely, because I do still believe that mothers can parent sons effectively. However, and I'm not saying this against research, that there's always been a need and a huge voice to say, boys who grew up with an absent male figure, can somewhat be disadvantaged. But then in that case, and this is having both heard your side of your intention towards writing the book as well as the structure of the law. How then can men father their children effectively, post a breakup or post a divorce?
Right. So that's a question I get every time I speak at a seminar or a conference, because I've seen some really angry men, like I'm telling you, the gentleman I met about 2 weeks ago. Look, it's a minefield, and sadly, relationships are not guaranteed. Like you mentioned earlier, I think it's about 50% last time I checked of marriages that end up in divorce in the first 10 years. That is a bad statistic. It basically means people are making commitment at the altar or in the court of law, wherever it is that they choose to sign their marriage certificate, but sadly they're not sticking to it for the long term. The death did to us part of the vows doesn't really stick for most, and for whatever reason that it is. Now, in that 10-year period, like you mentioned, kids come through, possibly 2 or 3, and it then complicates the whole thing when father and mother, their relationship has not worked, but children still need access to both. And with mother no longer wanting to see daddy no longer want to talk to mother, etc., it really just convolutes the whole thing and creates a bit of chaos. Now, my encouragement, which I always say, is you need to put yourself out of the question, and you need to remove your children from between the equation. Don't make it about the children. Think about the best interest of the children. What is it that your children require to make them well-rounded individuals that will be fully functional in society in the next generation, in the next 20 years? Think about it from a long-term perspective. And as you mentioned earlier, research shows that children need both sets of parents. They get stuff from their mother and they get stuff from their father. So for you denying them access to either or basically means you're denying them something that really will affect them when they grow up. So it's really something that we have to now work at and say, how do we make sure that in as much as there's animosity between me and my ex, we still have some sort of civility and a semblance of understanding each other to make sure that we do the best for our children. Those children did not choose to be born. They didn't choose to be born to you either as parents. They didn't choose, where they stay, etc. You, in your marriage setup or in your setup where you were cohabiting together, I don't want to say manufactured, but gave birth to those children, and it's your responsibility, to make sure that they grow up to become the best versions of themselves that they can be as a parent. And for you now to do that means you have to work together. So the communication is key. Hey, people will need to communicate. I know, especially when somebody gets remarried, especially on the male perspective, that the new wife tend not to want to have contact between the old wife, the ex, even if there's kids, for security issues, I imagine. And I think that's unfortunately sad, because we need to realize that in as much as we are moving on in the relationships and our love lives, these kids require us. They require the things that we need to give to them as their parents, whether you're the mother or the father. And whether or not we separate, of course, time is not going to be the same. The fact that you're staying under the same room and spending so much time with your kids is not going to be the same when you move out of the house and you're staying somewhere else. But you must try by any means necessary to ensure that you maintain a civil relationship with your ex, but at the same time have some sort of access and spend some quality time with your children. Not necessarily quantity, but quality time, to ensure that the relationship that you have with your kids continues even after the relationship has ended. So it's something that you really have to be intentional about.
We are in conversation with Ronald Muringai, who is the author of Fathering a Son, and we're unpacking whether South African divorce law fails good dads, or dads who are trying to be present. Give us a call on 0861-987-000, and let's have this conversation. For the most part, absent fathers are treated or, called out in the same bucket as you are intentionally trying to be there. But the discovery that you as a father, you might trying to be present, you might try to be making an effort towards being in your child's life. However, the law, and I'm not saying just your partner or the mother of your children, but the law has a way of barring you from such intentions. I think for me, it's both heartbreaking and just I want to say unconstitutional. I don't know to what extent we can take up this law, but it feels illegal for anyone to be able to practice this freely. But give us a call on 0861-987-000 and let us know what you're struggling with. If you've experienced this before, statistically it seems quite rampant, and I'd want to hear from people who have tried to be in their children's lives and have struggled by virtue of the law. Ronald, I just wanted to find out what impact does this have on children? I'm not talking about sons alone, but in general, by virtue of not being allowed access to their parent, and whether they even know that this is happening.
There's a lot. So there's a lot of things that children get from their parents. I think subconsciously, or within the makeup of how, when people grow up, it's supposed to be. One of them is identity. And I think you've watched TV shows like Utatako and Kumbule Kaya and, Paternity Court and etc., where our identity, especially as Africans, is always rooted in Bande or in Duwe, where you come from. So if there isn't sufficient knowledge about that, there's always a question now about who am I really on this earth. And there's one particular episode that I watched of one of these shows, I think it's the DNA one, where there was potentially two men who were potentially the father of this child, and when the results showed to be none of the men that were actually in the room that were tested for that DNA, this young man broke down, the extent that I even found myself teary. And his really main concern was, therefore, who am I on this planet? What am I doing here if I don't even know who I am? So I think it's important to understand that, a child's identity is shaped primarily from the parent's perspective, and especially within our African context, by them knowing their father, and their surnames being connected to even the ancestral side of life, So that's one of the things that's important that children end up missing on if they don't have their fathers. But there's so many other things that fathers teach their children as well, and mothers as well. That's how to relate with women, for example. If you don't see daddy loving mommy at home as a child growing up, how then do you frame a relationship, a romantic relationship, when you get older? Girls particularly get affirmation from their fathers, and they always say, I think from a psychological perspective, that dads are the first boyfriends of girls. So much so that, when a girl starts dating or even looks into getting married, the guy they get married to is somewhat similar to their father, in one trait or another. So that example setting is massive, from both the male and the female perspective. That's mother and father giving to the child. So that, there's a lot of things that really one needs to get from both sets of parents, and especially from the father, that if they grow up without, they might be lack in one of the things I think I can talk about is authority as well, if I still have time. It basically says to respect authority, especially for young men. I'm sure as a young man growing up myself, I can give you my story as an example. Age 12, 13, I kind of started rebelling, because now mom is telling me to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I don't feel like doing that. And I'm taller than her now, physically stronger than her. She can't necessarily beat me anymore. It becomes no longer a disciplinary session, but a negotiation session. And if there is no dad in that particular household to lay down the law, that boy already graduates to becoming a man around about that age. And I think from psychological reports as well, from the research that I did when I was writing the book, it is that age that men who come from fatherless homes tend to find their own path and carve their own way and get recruited into gangs if there's no authority at home, and what all this gender violence that you're seeing as well, I believe most of it as well from research kind of comes from men who come from fatherless homes. So there's a lot of things that kind of go broke if a father or / mother is not available in the house to hand over certain things to that child. That child feeds and grows off of the relationship of both parents. So it's something that we really cannot deny access to, as we are discussing tonight.
And I mean, I want to agree with you on one point there, that where dads are present for the most part, your first image as a young woman of the men you will date becomes what your father was, or the I want to say the role they played in the family, or the role they played with your with your mother, always becomes the image of who you would want to find as a partner. And I can say this, and again, like I said earlier, father, if you're listening, again, Superman. Where I remember practically vocalizing this to him, not once, not twice, where I kept saying to him, I will never get married because I won't find a partner like you. It's not going to be it's not humanly possible. You've been such an amazing human being that for me, I mean, I'm happy to become a Catholic nun at this point. It's perfectly fine.
Wow.
And I mean, I was quite a child at the point, but I do realize even in my adult relationships and interactions with people that I do still seek the kind of respect and kind of civility that my parents sort of exercise towards each other. But while we're here, and I mean, we're talking about moms and dads in the very what do we call it, in a very heteronormative manner, and I want to maybe say that could this still be a very similar or the same case where and again, I was asking about, the effects this has on children, because in as much as, yes, sons do struggle with respecting authority if their father figure was not there, or struggle to respect women in the adult relationships if their father was not there. However, I would want to understand that there must be some emotional consequences, or a feeling of rejection, to say the least, when a parent is gone and has been barred from you, which looks like they've chosen to leave you. And I'm saying this with very selective terms to sort of veer away from the heteronormative marriage, for instance.
Sure.
Is that a thing? Is that a case we can state?
No, that is you cannot run away from it, and I think there's no better way of putting it actually, because unfortunately, like I said, I think in terms of the makeup of our genetics, of our psyche, as it were, we kind of need both. And we really can't function effectively or optimally. I'm not saying single mothers obviously are going to struggle, or single dads will raise children who are broken. Not necessarily, but it basically says they have a lesser chance. They don't have as much a chance as one who comes from a both-parent household. And not to say as well, I think there's a lot of disclaimers one can put here. It's not to say that where mommy and daddy are both in the house, suddenly this child is going to become better than the one next door, who's not necessarily that either. But it just says the structure with which it needs to happen is in place to give the child the best possible chance for them to become a well-rounded individual who can make an impact and a difference in society. So, of course, there's a lot of T's and C's attached to that. Is dad doing his job? Is he spending time with the kids? Is he actually teaching his kids all these things? Is he flying around the world and not spending time, etc., etc.? We can talk about that all night. Or mommy herself, does she love this kid? Is she showing him the love that he requires? Is she nurturing him, etc., etc.? So the T's and C's are plenty, but I'm saying the basic structure, at least from which we can start to say this is how it should look like, is both parents in the house taking care of the child and imparting into the child that which they require to become fully functional in society when they grow up. And of course, we've seen people that have made it without either parent, and like I'm saying, that's not to say there's something wrong with that, but it's not the ideal. What would ideally really be available is if daddy and mommy were at home, present and emotionally engaged with their children. Because I think for most part, from this, I did a survey when I was writing the book, and I sent a questionnaire to about 120 guys. I think about 50% response rate I got. Most guys, if not 90% of them, were saying they never heard the words "I love you" come from their father. And of course, we can blame the patriarchal system and that we should grow up. We can blame, the strict, African nature that our fathers were, and we almost become now emotional droids or unfeeling robots because we weren't told that we are loved, and hence it becomes a bit difficult for us to tell that we love. And I'm sure a lot of women can say amen, because probably not hearing it enough from their boyfriends. But that's only because they never really got it themselves. So you can't really pass on that which you don't have internally. You can't really give out that which you don't have inside. And my encouragement, therefore, is to say, let's build these wholesome children by giving them not only a roof over their head, not only good food and taking them to good school, but spending quite time with them and showing them and telling them that we love them and we care for them, and give them that nourishment and that satisfaction where they walk with their heads held high because they know I am loved, I am cherished, and somebody at home is proud of me. That self-confidence issue is something major, because some people are looking out there for that affirmation and that self-confidence because they think they don't get it at home. Daddy doesn't affirm me. Daddy doesn't tell me that he's proud of the little efforts that I'm doing. Every time a report comes, he's scolding me instead of encouraging me, etc., etc., etc. So I'm saying, let's try and turn this whole thing around and not only just give the physical aspect, but thank you for mentioning it, also fulfill the emotional delegation that we need to give to our children.
Ronald, maybe towards our closing, what can dads do legally? Now that we're having this conversation, when we have these platforms to express these kinds of concerns and biases that the law has exhibited for so long, what then can fathers do? Who do they talk to? Are there people they can talk to even? Because we now know through your work and through other people's work that in as much as we acknowledge and are aware of absent fathers, there are fathers who really are trying and willing to be present in their children's lives. Where do they get help?
Right. I think before I tell you that, there's a guy I should mention, I probably saw it in the press, called Solomon Mondlane, who spent, I think, about 11 days outside the Department of Social Department offices in Pretoria, protesting, having a hunger strike because he was denied access to his children by his ex, and that's an extreme thing for a man to do, to show that he wants access to his children. We should not get to that point. It should not be that difficult to have access to children. But indeed, yes, there are options that one can follow. One can go to their local family court or / the High Court and get advice on what to do. One can speak to a family lawyer if they can afford it, failure to which they can just go to their family social worker, speak to a social worker who can then make arrangements, to try and see what can be done to access their children. But as cultural, as Africans, we do have our families. When someone gets married, they don't get married, they don't just elope and go to Las Vegas church and get married. Our families negotiate on our behalf. So if at all it is possible, let's start there. Let's speak to Malume. Let's speak to Abu Koko, to go speak to Abu Malume on the other side and say, look, we have a problem. We came, we got married, our marriage dissolved, but there are children now that we really want to have access to as the paternal or the maternal side of the family. And can you therefore make things happen? So negotiation can take place as well from a familial perspective, without really having to resort to the courts. But in case that is not functional and there's no relationship and there's no potential communication, then one can really approach the courts and really approach the lawyers to get that assistance. There are organizations called the Fathers Network out there. There's FAMSA, so many organizations out there that can really help at low cost, and some of them actually do this pro bono just to ensure that people get the access that they need to their children. So people don't have to resign to the fact that, I've been blocked out, so I tried my best, there's nothing I can do. There are legal options available for you that can enforce and ensure get injunctions to see your children. And let's not just quit on our kids, our kids need us. It's not just a case of, so, do your best and grow up and be the best that you can do. No. You are still the father. You are still the mother. If you are denied access and you believe it's illegal, look for that organization that can help you to do that, and there are plenty of them around this country.
Ronald, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning, and unpacking parts of conversations that, for the most part, due to popular belief and popular perspective, sort of avoided. We are very okay to talk about absent fathers because it's obviously wrong, and it's a phenomenon that has plagued our society. But we need to also have the flip side of the conversation where we all agree and all understand that some fathers do want to be there. And can try as much as they want. However, by virtue of the law, as we discussed today, there are loopholes that can be exploited by either party to bar parents from seeing their children. Thank you so much, and have a good morning going forward.
No, thank you for the opportunity, and I really hope somebody was helped out there. Well,
me too. That was Ronald Muringai, who is author of Fathering a Son, sort of breaking down the question of whether the South African divorce law is failing good dads or failing, willing fathers who would love to be in their children's lives. And we say good dads and not necessarily good moms, and not to avoid the good moms, but to say not to cut the good moms out of the equation, but because by virtue of traditional law, traditional custom, we've always seen that the law will forever sort of protect mothers, or by virtue of having been raised mostly by moms, we now know that kids for the most part will be raised by their moms, and the court will obviously believe the woman. Give us a call on 0861 987 000, and find us on Power FM and on Twitter at Power FM 987 #PowerZone, and weigh in on these conversations. It's unfair for certain parts of society to not have a voice by virtue of what we've always believed. Find us on our frequencies at Pretoria and Johannesburg 98.7, Johannesburg South and West Rand 103.6, Vereeniging 104.4, East Rand and Ekurhuleni 107.2, and our audio channel on DSTV is 889. Find myself as well on Twitter at MMUSA TONDWA.
You've been listening to a Power 98.7 podcast. For more podcasts, visit power987.co.za or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.